With us is Don Gray, Chief Security Strategist at Solutionary, and he's here with us today to go over the highlights of their Global Threat Intelligence Report. How are you doing?
Great, Danielle. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So can you talk a little bit about DDoS and the changing threat, for organizations? People have been kind of underestimating what the DDoS threat is, or even the cost is to organizations.
Sure. I think one of the things that we've seen in our experience from looking at our customer base, and that's where the data from the report comes from, is from our managed security services customers, thousands of customers we're gathering information for. And what we've seen over the past year is a uptick in DDoS capability and activity. We've seen a couple of things. Number one is during DDoS attacks, we see a much broader base of attack. In many of the attacks, we have up to 80 countries participating in the attack. And the number of actual endpoints is increasing. So it's much harder to pursue some of the strategies people may have used in the past to filter out specific attacks based on source or type of source. The other thing we're seeing is DDoS attacks are now much more directed towards the application layer than they were at the network layer. So it's easier, softer target, it seems like, to go after that application layer, and at times you can hide behind the SSL encryption that the applications are taking place. So it's a little bit harder to detect what's actually going on and what they're trying to do with it. I think the third thing is that people are seeing DDoS attacks as a diversion tactic or a smokescreen tactic to hide another targeted attack that's happening at the same time. And so we've seen this across our customer base, these kinds of three evolutions of DDoS. And I think the final thing is that in the past, organizations, a couple of years ago, organizations may have felt like they weren't a target for DDoS, that they sort of didn't fit that profile. They weren't an online gambling site, or they weren't a large online retailer. But I think now what we're seeing is there's this combination of consumer activism, social media, and the hacktivist groups, and the tools that they publish that can really combine together to make anyone a target for DDoS. It's not necessarily the obvious choices anymore. Anybody could be one PR mistake away from having a DDoS attack directed at them.
And since we're talking about groups that are the targets, especially these are a lot of times hacktivist-led attacks, can you talk more about, I guess, certain affinities that attackers have with certain industries or groups, and what trend we'll see this year with that?
Yeah, that's what we found was interesting in the data when we started looking at it, is there are these, as you said, affinities between countries of origin for attack and industries, countries of origin for attack and methods being used, right? So for instance, Chinese seem to attack business services, right? It's one of the bigger places they're focusing their attention. Finance is sort of equally shared by everyone, right? Everyone wants to go after the money. Japan, in fact, we see sourcing attacks for manufacturing, which, like I said, it's an interesting thing. I think when people look at the information and be able to say, okay, what industry am I in? Where should I tend to focus my attention a little more because of what we're seeing happen there.
And one of the things in the intelligence threat report is a discussion on BYOD and that your organization can be secure. I just wonder, from your opinion, there's been a little back and forth even from our readers on what the real threat is with mobile devices. There's been talk of botnets, hosting mobile malware. What is the biggest threat in your mind?
Well, I guess when I talk about BYOD, right, I think of it across the whole spectrum. So not just phones, not just phones and tablets, but laptops, things that are traditionally used to do more data processing, have more information stored on them, and that sort of thing. So that's the first thing is BYOD to me includes all those things. From a mobile side itself, it really depends on what people are using the devices for, right? If you're an organization that's highly integrated an iPad into your operations, and you're storing critical data and access to critical systems from that, then perhaps your exposure is a little larger than the normal situation. For the most part, I think we see organizations trying to limit the access that those devices have, and therefore the exposure that mobile phones, smartphones have. We, from our direct experience with our customer base, have certainly seen much more impact on bringing a laptop into work that my children use to play Zynga games with, right?
Can you highlight in the report the part where you guys talk about response timeline?
So within the report, we have 4 major threats that we identify: BYOD, DDoS, as we talked about, malware attacks, and web application attacks. And so for each of those areas, we actually have built a timeline for the reader of the report to see all the way from tactical steps that they can implement, all the way to longer term, perhaps more cost strategic steps they can implement. And they can see, by looking at the timeline, where is their organization within each of those 4 areas, right? And then perhaps get some guidance on what the next step is that they should take. When we focused on making this, very practical, usable advice for regular organizations to help assess where their security program is. We actually include an assessment, a self-assessment piece with the report, a link to it, and then identify how do they spend that next dollar to most effectively get more security.
Thanks for being with us, Don.
Thank you for having me, Danielle.
All right, Don Gray, Chief Security Strategist at Solutionary. Please join us next time.